Hello, Tech fans, and welcome into the latest Tech Sideline Podcast, originating from TSL's high-tech studios in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Whether you are watching or listening, live or archived, we're so glad you could join us today as we record on Wednesday, October 23rd, and preview the Virginia Tech men's basketball season. Excited to dive into some hoops today. Our crew today, as always, we got Malcolm Stewart behind the scenes producing on the podcast set, our managing editor, Chris Coleman, our founder and head honcho, Will Stewart, and I am your podcast host, Evan Hughes. Glad everybody could be with us today, again, recording the morning of Wednesday, October the 23rd. A reminder that this week and every week, the Tech Sideline Podcast is presented by the Fisher Law Firm, Virginia's trusted DUI and traffic defense firm, dedicated to defending individuals charged with traffic-related offenses. From their offices in Blacksburg and Roanoke, the Fisher Law Firm handles cases throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. To date, the firm has defended more than 30,000 people charged with moving violations. For a free consultation, call anytime, day or evening, toll free at 1-800-680-7031. Again, that's 1-800-680-7031, or email them at info@fisherlegal.com. Gentlemen, good morning to you. Second podcast of the week. Great to be back with you. And first, want to throw it over to Will for a podcasted update, because for those watching today, something new about the podcast.
Right. Today it's very subtle, but if you're watching on video, check out the coffee table, and specifically look underneath. The little mini helmets are lit up now. We got some under cabinet LED lighting that I installed yesterday. Really good stuff. I don't know how you pronounce the company's name. It's Litever. Litever, I don't know. But very highly reviewed on Amazon. Had everything I wanted in the package. So I'm trying it out underneath the table. I think it looks very cool. And I've been hankering to get some under cabinet lighting on our shelves here. Really, really dress it up. So, you know, what can I say, man? The bye week's coming at the right time. It's been 5 weeks and 1 day since my accident where my finger got broken. So I figure, you know, with this week off, by the time the Notre Dame game happens, I'll be back to full strength.
Like Hendon Hooker.
Yeah.
He'll be back to full strength by?
Like Deshaun Crawford, more importantly, Deshaun Crawford. But that doesn't mean there isn't some stiffness. Like, I can't bend those fingers all the way, but I'm really excited because I think I'm really close to being able to type normally again. But anyway, that's what we got going on with the podcast set. So I think by next Monday's podcast, we'll have even more cool accent lighting on the set. We got some more lights we're going to put up top. So I'm super jacked about everything.
Thanks for all you're doing. It's always exciting to see what we're doing here at Tech Sideline, the podcast continuing to evolve. Cece, what's going on? How are you doing today?
I'm tired. I got home from the basketball media day yesterday. Immediately did a radio interview, and I was laying on the couch while I was doing the radio interview. I fell asleep when the interview was done. I was so tired, and I didn't wake up till 9 o'clock last night. So then I was up all night.
I was about to say, that's the worst, because if you take a long nap, you can't sleep.
Yeah.
I know we've had this discussion before about what's the longest you've ever slept. I slept 16 hours straight once.
Yeah, that's probably about right.
Yep. Woke up to go to the bathroom a couple times, went right back to bed.
Right back to bed.
Had the old Rumpelstiltskin thing going when I got up.
Well, we've got a great podcast on hand for today. As Will did mention, the bye week is coming up, and also coming up is the men's basketball season opener against Clemson. So today,
it's like 2 weeks away.
Yeah, just 2 weeks. And
13 days.
It's going to be interesting, and we'll talk about it opening up in league play. Of course, 20 ACC games this year, a little bit different. It's a new era in Virginia Tech men's basketball, and we'll kind of dive into everything here today on a Virginia Tech men's basketball preview podcast here on the Tech Sideline Podcast presented by the Fisher Law Firm. Do want to start with this, and this is the way that actually Mike Young, and I'll get y'all's thoughts in a minute, had media day on Tuesday in Castle Coliseum. You guys got to listen to him at the press conference, go into Han Hurst, but he started off his press conference basically saying he doesn't really have an opening statement, but that he did want to congratulate Justin Robinson, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and Ahmed Hill for their starts of their professional career. I thought that was a really classy touch from a guy who did not coach them, but obviously has gotten to know them and the impacts that they've had on the program. Chris, how neat is it to see J-Rob and Nickeil Alexander-Walker playing with professional basketball teams in the NBA?
Yeah, I think it's great. Zabian Dowdell played in the NBA for a hot second. Delaney was in there for 2 years.
Terrell Leddy made the Wizards at one point.
At one point, yeah. But you've never had two guys at the same time, I don't think, as far as I can remember.
Gosh, I would agree with that. Maybe back to the 70s.
At least
or
nobody
something
with
like
a
that.
legit chance to actually stick on a roster long term.
Yeah.
And Nikhil will obviously do that.
You know, you had Dell and Bimbo in the league at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that should have.
And that's since the early 2000s. That's 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, Dell came out in, 86, and Bimbo would have been 90.
And they both retired in like 2003, 2004.
Yeah, they had a lot of overlap. So sorry for the obvious oversight, but yeah, those guys played, and they played a lot. They both played a lot.
Yeah, I never think about those guys because I literally know I'm not old enough to remember them playing for Virginia
Tech. It's been a while.
Yeah.
And I don't follow the NBA anyway. I was a big Sixers fan back in the late 70s, early to mid 80s. But the last NBA I remember watching was after I graduated from Tech. I remember watching the Hornets when Dell was playing for them and Alan Bristow was coaching them. Mm-hmm. So I remember watching some playoff games. This is probably late 80s, maybe as late as 1990, but I've kind of tuned out since then. So.
It's important to note that it's not for sure that J-Rob is going to stick long term. I mean, he was undrafted.
Yeah.
And he's on a 2-way contract, which I believe means within 45 days they're required to send him to their G League. Franchise. He's on the roster because John Wall is hurt.
Right.
So John Wall will be back fairly soon, I think.
Yep.
And J-Rob will go to the G League at that point. But for now, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And after having a really good preseason, Nikhil apparently struggled last night.
He struggled to shoot. It was his first regular season game, and it was in Toronto, his hometown. They were playing against Toronto. Yeah. I guess that was the first NBA game, the first overall game and the first televised game of the year because it was on TNT.
Wow, the Raptors got their rings last night. They were playing the Pelicans, but of course yesterday Nikhil ended up with 3 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, and he was we played 12 minutes.
Yeah, he was really pressing early apparently. Like I checked the box score on my phone, and in the first 3 minutes, he had already taken 5 shots but had 3 rebounds.
He was 1 of 10 from the field, 1 of 7 from deep.
Yeah, so he went out there in his first game and just started shooting.
Wow.
Yeah.
But it's going to be kind of interesting. The Pelicans, not going to go on NBA tangent here, but they've got Zion, they've got a bunch of Lonzo Ball, the pieces after training, Anthony Davis, Nikhil. So Nikhil's in a really interesting position where he's going to be on national television a pretty good amount this year.
That's true. So Hokie fans will get to see him a lot. So.
Maybe the camera will be on him a few times when it's not on Zion.
I don't know about
Although
that.
Zion's out for 6 to 8 weeks.
Yep.
Yeah,
well, I thought that would be a cool way to kind of open up the Tech Sideline podcast, just because I remember.
So before we move on from that, Mike Young, I'm going to call him Mike. We call Buzz. I'm going to call Mike Young Mike. I don't want to be informal or disrespectful. That's just how I'm going to roll. So you've been warned. Mike opened the press conference, talking about those guys. And one of the things that he's doing well is he is making an effort to establish and keep those ties with the former players, I think, and the history of the program. Of course, he has Ace Custis on his staff. And I don't remember, I could flip through my material on my lap here. I don't want to do that right at the moment. But Ace has one of those job titles that you read it and you're like, well, what does that guy do? So he's it's like director of...
It is coordinator of basketball relations.
Coordinator of basketball relations. So your first question is like, what does he do for that? And we'll look it up later while you guys are talking. I'll look it up and actually read it to you what his job description is. But my take is that Ace is there to provide a link to the past history of the program. If you go on Hahn-Hurst, we were in there yesterday, and within the area where the 2 basketball practice courts are, just about all evidence of Buzz has been removed. I'm sure I haven't been in there a while. There were probably all kinds of Buzz get better type quotes all over the wall. They're gone. That doesn't mean there's a couple of pictures of Buzz and former players, but down towards the corner, one of the graphics is Ace Custis. So Ace is a guy who part of his job is just kind of mentoring the players and kind of providing that link to the past and past experience of playing at Virginia Tech. So, and Chris and I got to meet him. That's the first time you had met him, right?
I actually met him in Lot 2 on Saturday.
Well, okay.
And I met him at Buzz's press conference also when Buzz first got hired.
Yeah, because I guess Buzz. So I guess Buzz came out of the gate. I remember Bimbo was also at that.
Yeah, he was.
I guess Buzz came out of the gate sort of looking like he was going to, link to the past also. I think for Mike, it's going to be more of an ongoing thing. And the fact of the matter is, I think in talking about this media day and in the early part of Mike's tenure, I think there's going to be a lot of comparison between the way Buzz did things and the way Mike is doing things. And part of that is just there's some of the things, there's such a big contrast, like the way Mike deals with the media. He's very casual with them. He calls them by their first names. I remember, and Chris, maybe you have a more exact memory than I do. I remember Buzz's first press conference, he threw down the gauntlet with Mark Berman. He's something like, "Oh, I've heard of your reputation," or something like that. "Go ahead, give me your best shot." So he was very contentious out of the gate.
He was confrontational, right?
Confrontational, that's the word I'm looking for, and Mike is not that way. So just wanted to kind of get that out there. Please don't fuss at us for doing a lot of comparisons. I think it's natural at first.
Buzz was the most interesting person I've ever covered. He was a jerk to the local media and really nice to the national media. I didn't care because he won a lot of games. I mean, I'm in there when he's being a jerk to the local media, but I don't care because he won a lot of games. So I'm not going to make fun of the guy because he gave me the best period of basketball in Virginia Tech history.
Yeah.
Let me give you a little trivia. Now, what was Ace's title?
Coordinator of basketball operations.
Coordinator of basketball relations.
Okay. So Frank Beamer was the pioneer, the trendsetter of support staff. Did you know that? Let me give you an example. When Brian Steinspring was a grad assistant, all right, I think you could only be a grad assistant for like 2 or 3 years. So after he's exhausted his eligibility as a grad assistant, for lack of a better word, Frank didn't want to lose him to another school. So he goes up to him and said, "We want to hire you some random position for a year, and then you will be on the coaching staff as a coach after a year," or something like that. And Frank gives him a job application and says, "Write down whatever title you want. Here's what you're going to be making." So Steinspring wrote down director of football. And so for a year, Brian Steinspring was director of football at Virginia Tech.
Wow.
So Frank Beamer was actually the pioneer of support staff.
Wow. Not exactly Nick Saban-esque.
Not exactly Nick Saban-esque.
But he did. And I'm sure he had to talk to Dave Brain about that. So
yeah.
I guess Dave was still here, and then Frank was probably like, "Man, I really want to keep this guy." And,
Could you imagine if your boss says, "Here, create whatever job title you want, and you have free
director
reign"?
of football.
That is.
Well, I get to create my own job title. Nobody gave me my job title.
Very true.
I created the head honcho job title.
It is in your Twitter bio. Hey,
It is not on my business cards, however.
Well, so I do want to get your thoughts on Media Day from yesterday, but again, just kind of want to give a kind of just a timetable, kind of where we picked up from basketball last year, and again, the last game that Tech played was a thriller in the Sweet 16 against Duke. The tip-in nearly went in from Ed Hill. And then Buzz leaves for Texas A&M. Mike Young's hired. He comes in within his first week, keeps Landers Nolly, who put his name in the transfer portal. He keeps Wabisa Beatty. He gets Jalen Cone. Kerry Blackshear goes to Florida. He gets a really strong assistant coaching staff that has been praised by the ACC network I was listening to the other day. We'll talk about that. And then here we are now all the way up till Media Day, 2 weeks until the season has begun against Clemson. So I'll start with you. Since the day Coach Young has been hired, what has he done well? What has impressed you most since he's taken over the reins of this program?
The assistant coaching hires that he made, the biggest question when he was hired was recruiting. Everybody knows the guy can coach, and everybody knew he'd be good with the fans and the media. But how was he going to recruit? And he did a good job hiring staff. And Chris told me a story yesterday that he was probably trading emails or texts with a guy we trust with a really good basketball mind. And what did he say?
He's a former college basketball assistant coach.
Yeah, so he rated the hire as a 5 or 6 at first. Mm-hmm. And then after seeing the assistant coaching hires, he rated the hire as an 8 or 9.
That's right. Yeah.
So this is a person who has coached in the college ranks and knows his college basketball. And I think that's one of the more profound statements I've heard about how Mike is running the program.
Chris, how about you? What has stood out most since he's been hired?
That. I think he did a good job hiring his assistants. They have a lot of good recruiting ties in this region where Tech wants to recruit. Recruiting has gone well so far when it comes to guards. And he's going to be able to recruit guards. They like to shoot the ball. And
he's got a system that gets shots.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a structured system. This isn't a Buzz Williams type deal. This is more of a Tony Bennett deal. More exciting than Tony Bennett's pack line defense and kind of slow moving offense, but it's structured like Tony Bennett. Not the exact same system, of course, but structured. I think he's recruited guards well. It's going to come down to whether he can get a good center. He had a good center last year at Wofford, and that's when things really took off. He needs a center that can pass, dribble, and shoot, and all that stuff.
In other words, a Kerry Blackshear.
A Kerry Blackshear, exactly. Yeah. Their center last year at Wofford was second on the team in assists. So they don't have anybody like that on this team. Maybe Ojiako will be that guy at some point, but he's only a freshman. They're not going to recruit well at power forward, in my opinion. I know that they're probably going to lose P.J. Hall to Clemson on Thursday.
So to jump in there a little bit, PJ's about number 60 in the country, is that right?
60 to 75 range.
Yeah. So power forward, it's coming down between Tech and Clemson. It looks like Clemson is going to get him. That's where all the crystal balls are headed.
Yeah.
We're doing this podcast on Wednesday morning, and PJ is going to announce on Thursday afternoon. And we all think he's going to Clemson, but anyway, continue.
Yeah. PJ is a talented player, or at least a highly ranked player. In Mike Young's system, the power forward is generally just a screener and a rebounder. And top 100 kids don't just want to go to college and set screens, right? So I don't think we're going to recruit highly ranked kids at the power forward position, in my opinion. Kiva Luma, who is joining him from Wofford, I think he will start at power forward for Virginia Tech next year, but he has to sit out this year for transfer rules.
Due to transfer rules, yeah.
Imagine that.
So I like how we kind of dived into a little bit of recruiting, the guys that he has brought in, and I want to dive into the roster a little bit later. But you guys now got to go and talk with some players yesterday, got to talk with Ace Custis. Will, I know you got to talk to Coach Young. Take our listeners through, and our viewers as well, what the media day was like yesterday with Coach Young. What did you guys get to experience, and what did you take away?
So we did the traditional press conference in the Castle Media Center, which is, man, what a dark little hole that place is, but nobody cares, because when you look at the videos and get the quotes and things like that, it looks fine, but to actually be there, it's a little hole in the wall. That's neither here nor there. So we got about 20 minutes there, and then they walked us over to the Honhurst Center, and then they had all the players were made available. They were sitting around behind tables, with little name cards and things like that. So you'd know who they are, because there's a lot of guys there. You're like, who's this guy? And I didn't really ask a lot of questions there. I was not. Chris is more of our basketball guy, and I'm not really prepared to talk to the guys a lot and ask good questions. So we did that for about 20 minutes or so, and then they did team photos of the coaches and staff and players. And boy, you thought Buzz had a big group. Mike Young's got a big group. There were a lot of people in that room. I don't know how many of them are going to wind up sitting on folding chairs, during games on the sidelines.
Yeah, it's not quite as many as Buzz.
You don't think so?
No. Buzz had one guy in there that I know wasn't even listed anywhere in the media guide, online. I think he might have even lived with Buzz for a while. His name was Big Frank. Nobody would ever tell me for Big Frank's last name or exactly what he did. But he was always in the team photos.
Yes.
Anyway,
so,
Buzz is a weird dude.
And then we got to observe probably about 20. It was supposed to be 20 minutes of practice. I think it wound up being more like 30 minutes of practice. And during that practice, let's see, we watched Mike walk the players through a series of plays that you can tell they're prepping for their next
they're
scrimmage.
practicing zone offense because they're playing Richmond this weekend in a scrimmage.
Yeah. Then we got to what they ran the floor some, did some. I think part of what they were working on at one point was transition defense, because they would run offense without any defense, and they would feed it to the middle, and the post player would dunk or lay it in, and they wouldn't let the ball go through the net and then pass it in. It would immediately get thrown in by 5 guys who are on offense getting ready to run the floor. So he was you could tell he was practicing transition defense in particular, getting that big man from being right at the rim to being all the way down the other end of the floor.
And he said in his press conference that they've got to get a lot better in transition defense.
So they're working on that yesterday. But Mike he's a very relaxed guy. He's good with people. I did get a chance to talk to him briefly while they were setting up the team pictures and things like that. And I told Mike, I said, you and I have to get together and talk about early 1980s Radford Bobcat basketball, because Mike played. He graduated from Radford High, as a lot of people know. And in 1980, and I was living in Charlottesville, and back then they used to play the state championship Final Four in Charlottesville at University Hall there at UVA. And so I had lived in Radford as a kid, and I knew some of the guys that played for those Radford teams, and I still had friends back in Radford. So I remember when I was a sophomore in high school, spring of 1981, Radford came up and played in the state semifinals against Harrisonburg. And I could talk about that for a while. Radford had Phil Williams. He was a sophomore, and Phil later played for Virginia Tech. And Harrisonburg had a guy, if you're a longtime Virginia Tech basketball fan, you remember this guy's name, Pee Wee Barber. Pee Wee played for Harrisonburg in high school, and then went and Pee Wee did not overlap with Ralph Sampson. Before anybody wants to ask that question, no, he didn't. He and Ralph were 2 different eras at Harrisonburg High. But that my sophomore year in high school, Mike was a senior, so he was on that Radford team that lost to Harrisonburg in the state semis. So, we were just talking about that a little bit, and talking about 2 years later, after Mike had already graduated, they came in again, and this time they lost to Martinsville. And Mike talked about when he was at, I believe he was saying when he was at Wofford, and he went in to recruit Martinsville High, he said he was just kind of in awe because Martinsville had a guy, Husky Hall, that had coached there for many years and won a bunch of state championships. And so, you just don't have these kind of conversations with not just Buzz Williams, but, a lot of college coaches. There's not, from what I can tell from being around Mike yesterday, there's not an arrogant bone in his body, but there are competitive bones in there. And talking to, let's see, I talked to Isaiah Wilkins briefly. Just wanted to ask him, how he chose between football and basketball, because every time I see Isaiah, he looks like a football player to me, And
I saw him with Beatty and Kroger this summer, and I'm like, who's that defensive end Beatty's with?
Every time I see Isaiah, I think I saw Isaiah walking down Warren Street the other day when everybody was tailgating for not the UNC home game, but the Rhode Island game. He went walking down Warren Street in that Center Street area, and I did the same thing. I looked at him and thought, that guy looks like a football player. Who is that? And I find I think that every time I see Isaiah Wilkins. So I was asking him, how did you choose basketball instead of football? And he said, I just didn't have a love of football. He said, I played football when I was younger, and he said it got to be about high school, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. And I said, I bet the high school football coach was all over you, though, right? And he's like, oh, yeah, every year. He's like, man, you got to come out for football. And no, I wouldn't do it. But I did ask Isaiah, I said, Coach looks like an easygoing guy, but he's pretty competitive, isn't he? And I don't remember who was sitting next to Isaiah, but they both just nodded and said, oh, yeah, he's competitive,
man. It was Keefe, and Keefe would know because he's already played for him.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. He said, oh, yeah, it comes out in practice, in preparation.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. And Isaiah Wilkins was big down the stretch for Virginia Tech last year. I'm sure he'll be an important part of the team this year, and we'll get into the roster here.
So I did ask Isaiah, I said, how is your role going to change this year versus last year? And he kind of looked at me and said, he said, I don't really know. I just want to help the team and win basketball games. And I thought, I'm just getting that answer. I said, I just nodded. I said, all right, thanks. And I started to walk away. And Keeve actually looked at me and said, that's a really good answer, man. That's what I want to do. I just want to win basketball games. So it sounded like a canned response, but I think he was being genuine.
Yeah. And he's going to play the 4 for Virginia Tech some this year, by the way.
Chico.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Isaiah Wilkins. I asked him where he's playing. He said 2, 3. And then I said, and 4 too? And he said, yeah, and some 4. So there's not a guy on this team that Mike Young considers a true 4. Like Buzz would want to play Landers Nolly at the 4 all the time.
Right.
That'd be his primary position under Buzz. Mike Young doesn't want to do that. He wants Landers Nolly to be a 3 and have a more traditional 4, like Kiva Luma, who played for the 4 for him at Wofford. They're not going to be able to do that. They're going to have to play guys like Landers Nolly and Isaiah Wilkins at the 4 to a certain extent this year. And I don't know how he'll adjust his offense because Nolly can shoot it. He can score it. And in Mike Young's offense, the 4 is always a screener, mainly. Screener and rebounder.
And he did say, I don't remember the exact question, but somebody basically asked him how, talk about Landers Nolly. And Mike said, and you could tell it pained him to say it. He's like, well, we're going to play him at the 4. He's a 3. But we're going to play him at the 4, and you can tell he doesn't want to do that.
Sure.
He said he's got – Christie, say he have 4 guys that can shoot the 3?
Yeah.
One of which is Landers Nolly.
One of which, of course, is Landers Nolly.
And he was alluding to how his teams at Wofford, I think the wording was, he goes, I used to have 4 guys that thought they could shoot the 3 ball.
Right.
We actually have 4 guys that can
I think
shoot
that's
the
pretty
3
much
ball.
what he said, yeah. I assume he's talking about Nolly, Beatty, Naheem Aline. That's how you pronounce that. Camargo can shoot it fairly well, it seems, although it's a very small sample size, and he's out with an injury.
Yeah, for
He'll
a
miss
while.
at least half the season, is what it seems like. Probably talking about Hunter Couture too.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, they still got shooters on this team.
So speaking of shooting, I want to ask this question before we take a timeout and come back and talk about individual players. I think a comparison could be made per se, but I know you have more insight to it, that people might see this team play and hear Coach Young say the emphasis he puts on the 3 ball. Well, is there a similarity to having Buzz and his system of relying on the 3 ball, and then Coach Mike Young and his system of relying on the 3 ball like at Wofford? Is there a transition for the guys that are returning, that there's a similarity between the 2 coaches in that regard?
Maybe from just the standpoint of getting you on open looks and things like that, and I guess you have certain freedoms to shoot it if you're open. But in general, I think Buzz's offense allowed for more creative freedom from his players. I think Mike Young's offense is more structured, as in do this no matter what.
And one of the things Chris pointed out to me yesterday, we were just talking. He said, it's going to take these guys a while to get good at this system. They've got some good players so everybody knows this year's going to be tough. But I wonder if part of the fan base is thinking, this year will be tough, but man, they'll start winning ball games next year. It may be a little longer than that.
Yeah.
It may be when the young guys are juniors and seniors, and he's had a chance to recruit a couple more guys to fit his system. This is going to be, to use the phrase, this is going to be a process.
Yeah. When I compare him to Tony Bennett, I'm not saying he's going to win a national championship or have as much success as Tony Bennett, but I'm comparing him to Tony Bennett in the fact that he is establishing a true system. And in his case, an offensive system, a structured system. And it takes a while to learn structure. And Tony Bennett inherited probably a better roster at UVA than Mike Young inherited. And Tony Bennett didn't win more than 16 games until his 3rd season.
Yeah.
So,
and even that, wasn't that the 3rd season that started out with them getting utterly stomped at Tennessee?
It might have been their 4th season. I don't remember.
It may have been 4 years in, but
yeah.
But he had to do Bennett had to do a lot of roster tear down and rebuild. That Mike Young's fortunate from that standpoint that he inherited almost no roster at all. So
yeah, pretty much.
Well, let's take a quick timeout. I want to come back and focus on a couple of individual players, and then it's time to jump into some questions on Facebook Live. You're listening to the Tech Sideline Podcast presented by the Fisher Law Firm. Welcome back to the Tech Sideline Podcast presented by the Fisher Law Firm. So glad that everybody could join us today. Recording on Wednesday, October 23rd. It is the Virginia Tech Men's Basketball Preview Podcast. We've got Malcolm Stewart behind the scenes producing, Will Stewart, Chris Coleman, and I'm Evan Hughes on the podcast set. All right, guys.
And we have the Terror Gnome.
Of course we have the
Terror Gnome. Brought his little lunch pail.
He hasn't moved. I don't think we move him until...
I'm telling you, another podcast set addition that we need is... we need a webcam on the Terror Gnome, and we need a light we can turn off and on. So we need to be able to cut to the Terror Gnome and light him up and show him. And then
You can't really see it, but I'm telling you, he's smiling through that gray beard. He's got a big smile on his face.
His eyes closed, he's grinning. He's also undefeated in Virginia Tech basketball. Ha ha.
So maybe during the basketball season, we get a little basketball to go next to his foot right there, next to the lunch pail. We can.
I'll see what I can come up with. I've got the little Seth Greenberg signed basketball up there, but that's kind of large. But we'll work on that.
So we've been talking about kind of the program as a whole so far on the podcast. I want to take time to kind of go through a couple of individual players. But before we do that, you guys brought up something that you guys thought would be fun to do on the podcast. I totally agree. You guys were looking at the roster, and you looked down at the pronunciation guide. Mm-hmm. So whoever would like to lead us off, for those that have not gotten familiar with the new roster yet, Will and Chris are going to take a dive into the pronunciation guide of the roster. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Now, oddly enough, Kivaluma is not listed on the pronunciation guide.
So we just assume it's pronounced Kivaluma.
Yeah.
So according to somebody on Facebook, it's
Keve.
So why is that not in the pronunciation guide?
So Malcolm didn't have the mic in front of him, but he says, according to somebody on Facebook, it's Keve. Is that right? Okay. Keve Aluma. All right. So, Chris, you're next. You take the next one.
Freshman guard from Buford, Georgia. Naheem Aline. It's not Allen. It's Aline. Naheem Aline. Who we hear really good things about, by the way. He was about 177 pounds when he enrolled. I remember seeing his picture during our staff send-home visit with him, and he was really, really skinny. And he's up to 195 now.
Yeah.
He's starting to look the part. Now, he's a guy that's reclassified. He's only 17 years old. He's supposed to be a high school senior, which is another reason
you need to be patient.
You need to be patient. This is not just a young team, but our young players are young even for freshmen. He reclassified. He's supposed to be a senior in high school. Jalen Cone is reclassified. He's supposed to be a senior in high school. Our next pronunciation guide effort, John Ojiako. 6'10" center from Nigeria, also reclassified. Now, he is 19 years old, but he came from a different country. He could still be going into a senior year in high school. Very, very raw. So these freshmen we got they're raw even for freshmen.
There are times where you'll essentially see what should be a decent high school all-star team playing against ACC teams.
That's an accurate statement.
Yeah.
Very accurate statement.
Will, what's the next one?
Well, before we move on from Ojiako, I thought, Chris, you said Ojiako's listed at 240, and you said, how much did you say he was in the recruiting process?
I thought he was like 215,
yeah,
thereabouts. We've had some guys put in some good work in the strength and conditioning program since they got here.
So he's listed at 6'10", 240.
He looks the part. Yeah.
He's a good-looking player.
Yeah,
and he can probably get to 250 or 260.
Oh.
And what Will means by that is he's a good-looking athlete.
Yes.
He's a very raw basketball player who
looks the part.
I believe if Kerry Blackshear had returned this year, they might redshirt Ojiako. Honestly, I would still redshirt him. He's just so raw. I mean, I wouldn't redshirt every freshman basketball player.
I was about to say, from sport to sport, the redshirt rule still applies.
I wouldn't redshirt every freshman basketball player. I would not redshirt most freshman basketball players. I would redshirt him just because he's so raw.
Sure.
I think he's got a high ceiling, but he's so raw that I don't know if he can get to that ceiling with just 3 off seasons.
Yeah,
you know?
He may be one of those guys where if the year after he leaves, you'll be thinking, man, I wish we had that guy.
I wish we'd redshirted that guy.
Yeah.
He's going to be the new Stephen Peoples.
So that kind of segues into so you were talking about the fours and how it's not really a glamour position in Mike Young's offense. And I think as you were talking about that earlier, I was thinking to myself, so that becomes a position where evaluation and potential become important.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to be able to land a 4 or 5 star guy at that position. So you really need to find the diamonds in the rough, guys that like banging, guys that aren't prima donnas and want to do the dirty work. So if I just had that thought go through my head while we were looking at it. So next guy I want to talk about is Hunter Couture. His last name is spelled Cattoor. And, oddly enough, I would have thought it's pronounced couture.
Yeah.
And the emphasis is on the tour. Couture.
You're taking a tour.
Right.
I'm taking a
That's
tour.
exactly how they spell it in the pronunciation guide. So when Hunter comes in the game, you can be the smartest fan sitting around watching and properly pronounce his name.
And a lot of people are high on Hunter Couture, right? That is a Mike Young.
He was originally signed to Wofford. He's going to play the 2 spot for Virginia Tech, the 2 guard position. He's not a point guard. Maybe can play it some in a if needed, but I think he's going to be a 2. He can shoot it. Questions about how well he'll be able to defend, we'll see, because he was originally a Wofford recruit. But I don't know. There's just a lot of unknown in this roster, and he's one of them.
So Mike did say yesterday that he prefers man-to-man defense, and he said we're going to have to. He said we may have to play some zone to. Did he say protect some guys?
Protect some guys.
And I think
he said they had to.
Go ahead.
Sorry, they said they had a. He said they had a tendency to foul a lot in the first half of their first scrimmage.
Right.
And then he talks like he's going to play PJ at center, or at the 5. Although I think he'll probably play the 4 and the 5. PJ
Horn.
If they're going to play PJ at the 5, they also got Brendan Johnson to play the 5. I would seriously redshirt Ojiako, but that's
And Brendan Johnson's a graduate transfer from Alabama State.
Right. But ideally you don't want PJ Horn playing 30 minutes at center. So when you talk about protecting guys, that's part of it.
Yep.
It's like last year you would want to really try to protect Kerry Blackshear so he can actually play 30 minutes.
So talking about redshirting, in football they've got the 4-game rule. Now in basketball there is no such rule, right? If you step on the court, your red shirt's blown. Medical redshirt, I think, is 30% of your games.
I think that's that. I don't know. Honestly,
yeah, so we'll have to do that research and get that out there. But my thought is there is no. I'm not sure though.
So one thing I do want to do real quick before we get to questions, there are two players that I really want to hit on and that we have not talked about. First one is Wabisa Bede coming back.
Right.
A guy that has been a role player his first 2 years, but he's also started. Okay, a guy who's been on the floor, Nikhil Alexander-Walker and Justin Robinson and Kerry Blackshear, experienced the highs of the NCAA tournament. Mike Young got him back, has said a lot of good things about Wabisa Bede.
I think Wabisa was in the portal for a while.
He was. He didn't come. It was like the middle of the summer when he announced that he was coming back.
Right.
Is this a guy who Mike Young right now can build around? Is Bede a guy this could be his team, quote unquote?
Well, it's going to have to be. Who else is going to belong to?
Well, good.
The only other upperclassman is Brendan Johnson. He's a redshirt senior, but he's a transfer from Alabama State. This is his first year at Virginia Tech. You got PJ Horn, and PJ doesn't talk. You can't get a word out of PJ. So he's not really. It's not really a leadership position. He's a lead by example type of guy. Bede is more likely to talk and take ownership. I mean, he's really the only option here. Eventually, it will be Jalen Cone. That guy.
That's what I was going to say.
That guy likes to talk. In fact, this team is so young, I could even see Jalen Cone having somewhat of a leadership position on this team.
Depending upon, do you have any sort of feel for how much where Wabisa is going to play? Is he going to play the point?
I think he and Cone will play the point.
Yeah, that's one of the things we didn't get a chance to get into at Media Day yesterday is, Mike, how do you see the playing time breaking down? I believe one of the things we've heard through the grapevine is that Wabisa is showing a lot more confidence in his game. I think he went through a period last year where, he was a good shooter as a freshman.
Was that North Carolina game last year?
Yeah, that North Carolina game, was that the first game Justin Robinson was, or he was in foul trouble?
Big foul trouble.
Beatty had to play a lot.
And Nikhil was in foul trouble, both at the same time.
And that just knocked Beatty off of his line for quite a few games.
Yeah.
And then he started to come on strong again at the end of the year. So I think some fans were critical of him, saying, I remember a lot of discussion on our message boards, oh, well, Beatty can't shoot from the outside. And I kept saying, he was like a 40% shooter as a freshman. If you get him open and he has confidence and rhythm, yeah, he'll make the shot. Stop saying he can't shoot from the outside, because that's not true. He's just not doing it well right now. So it's hard to say what we're going to see out of Wabisa. I think you'll see leadership from him. As to playing time and how well he plays, I think that remains to be seen.
He's a likable guy.
Yeah.
His Twitter handle is Captain Charisma, and he's got good charisma about him. He's got to get more confident when he's driving to the basket. And who knows how much driving he'll do now, though. There's a different system. I mean, I really have no idea. I'll be honest with you, I don't know exactly what Mike Young's system looks like. I've spent a lot of time watching Wofford basketball through the years. Yeah. But I think he is going to play, obviously, a huge role. He's going to start. He's captain by default, right? He has to be.
Yep.
All right, and then the last one, because we did talk about Landers Nolly of him probably having to play the 4 a little bit. You guys mentioned the natural scorer that he is. Do want to talk about Jalen Cone. I mean, this was one of the big early wins for Coach Mike Young, getting him to reclass, pulling him away from Tennessee to come to Virginia Tech. Where are your expectations for him this year?
I don't know where I put them this year. I mean, the guy's supposed to be in high school, and he's going to be his first college basketball game is going to be on the road against Clemson, and he's supposed to be in high school.
And he's small. He's listed at 5'11", 170.
Yeah, he's a really good athlete, though, and he's strong.
Yeah,
so that doesn't bother me. I mean, a lot of major schools wanted him. Yeah. Buzz wanted him at Texas A&M. Tennessee wanted him. Wake Forest wanted. A lot of schools wanted him, even though he was young. Now, I asked him yesterday. His older brother plays for Wisconsin, plays football for Wisconsin, defensive back, Madison Cone. And I said, when did you take your first trip to Virginia Tech? And he had to think about it for a second. He said, probably the 7th grade, when his brother was being recruited by Virginia Tech. So this is a guy that had so much familiarity with Virginia Tech. Not just Mike Young. He had a lot of familiarity with Tech from Buzz Williams and from Frank Beamer recruiting his brother. Or maybe that was maybe that was Fuentes first.
Yeah, we'd have to figure out the timing.
But very familiar with Virginia Tech. I think he'll, because of his brother playing in a major program, and he's got a really stable family situation. I think he's a little more prepared for the rigors than your average 17-year-old would be.
A little more prepared to be the man.
Yeah. Now, that said, I don't know what kind of player he is. I really have no idea. He was a highly ranked player.
Sure.
A lot of schools wanted him. He's going to play a lot, for sure.
He's a good leaper, never mind the 5'11" or 5'10" or 5'9" or whatever.
So, I think the thing that we're hearing from Chris is this team is young. There is talent. But as you said, the expectations to ease into them.
But Mike Young yesterday used a term. He said, there's an old adage, get old and stay old in college sports. And he's like, we're young. It's going to take 2 or 3 years before Tech is old.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this, and, I remember when Buzz Williams first started his first year at Tech, the record was bad, but you could see the potential. You could see how competitive they were. There were games where, I remember, Buzz's first year, didn't they have a chance to beat Syracuse on the last second shot?
Yeah.
By the
German
German point guard, Malik Mueller.
Yeah. The happiest I've ever heard Buzz was after a 16-point loss to NC State in his first year, because they played as well as they could possibly play in that game.
So, be patient, enjoy the process, look for the little things. In the same way, I can remember Buzz's first year, watching how hard they played and how all in they were. And I remember watching My mind is blanking. Seth Allen. Remember watching Seth Allen on the bench?
Mm-hmm.
And Seth and Zach on the bench, and just the chemistry they have with each other, just in their personalities, and thinking, man, once this all gets lined up, this is going to be good. And so kind of take that same viewpoint watching this team.
Yeah, take a long-term view. Now, this is a team that was picked 14th out of 15 in the ACC. Quite frankly, they would be picked 15th if anybody else was coaching Wake Forest.
Yeah.
So,
and we had a discussion yesterday, just standing around talking.
Yeah.
How many ACC games do you think this team's going to win? And
the consensus was 4 or 5.
They're playing 20,
and it's a 20-game schedule this year.
And I thought, you know what, 4 is my over/under. That's a lot of losses.
Right, they're going to pile up, and going out to Maui and playing Michigan State. Oh my gosh, high school kids playing Michigan State.
Yeah,
number one team in the country.
Right,
high school kids in Hawaii. Looking around, going, "Hey, man, we're in Hawaii," and then having
to play Michigan State's dunking on us. What's going on?
Well, listen, we'll have time to talk about that as well as Clemson, because that is coming up on us. So it is officially almost crossover season where the podcast will start to turn from a little bit of majority football, a little bit of basketball. We are getting there, and it is time to turn it over to the best producer in the land, Malcolm Stewart, standing by. What's going on, Malcolm?
Morning. So we've got a few questions. We'll start with Liam Monroe. With the players we have, do you think we'll possibly get an NIT appearance?
No chance. All right, the NIT, first of all, the NIT is no longer 40 teams. It's back to 32. All the small conference teams, if you win your regular season but then lose your conference tournament, let's say Radford is the number 1 seed in the Big South, and they lost the conference
that
tournament.
may have been the case last year with Radford. I don't remember.
Right, and then you lose your conference tournament, then they automatically get a spot in the NIT. These days, you got to win, like, Tech used to get in the NIT with 15, 16 wins and a 500 record. These days, you got to win 18 games.
Right.
And there's zero chance at the NIT. I don't want to say zero. But
so you're saying
it would be one of the biggest upsets in the history of basketball. If this
that
team
would be a stellar
NIT.
coaching job.
One of the quicker answers we've had before on the Facebook Live question.
There's 20 ACC games.
Yeah,
and
only 32 spots in the NIT, and 6 or 7 of those are going to be taken by automatic bids.
Are going to be stolen.
Yeah.
I mean, there's stolen bids.
Yeah.
So good question.
No, very fair question.
So I actually meant to say this earlier. PJ is apparently, according to Jordan Long and Chris Blevins, PJ is committing today at 3 or 3:45.
PJ Hall.
Yeah,
Is it today?
Yeah.
something like that.
So keep an eye out for that.
Right. So with that, Jordan Long asks, if we don't get PJ Hall to commit today, who else do you think we may go after this cycle?
I have no idea. I mean, I don't know who plan B and C guys are in basketball.
I saw some guys. There are some guys on our basketball board and our recruiting board who do know. Unfortunately, I don't remember what names they're throwing around.
We're in here. I didn't start thinking about basketball until yesterday.
The media day started at 2. I started thinking about it at 1:30.
Pretty much.
Let me add on to that question. Let me kind of take that and take. How about this? The recruiting class that Mike Young has put together for the following year.
Next year.
Yeah. There's some pretty good signings in there. How about
guards?
Yes,
good guards. No, they gotta get better at post recruiting. They gotta find a center, and they're kind of down to some lower level plan B, upper level plan C guys when it comes to center. That doesn't make Mike Young any different than any past Virginia Tech basketball coach, by the way. Yeah. If he struggles to recruit bigs, that's just the way it's always been here.
And I think I think I don't want to go out on a ledge here, but I think a lot of the success of his tenure may depend upon how well Ojiako develops.
Yeah, for sure.
Excuse me. All right. Has Mike Young – sorry, that's from Tom Mary Lester. Has Mike Young reached out to the student body at all? If so, how?
Yes. I believe it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. He was at the bookstore for about an hour and a half just signing autographs and taking pictures with fans. That is one thing I know for sure that he was doing recently.
Buzz one time, I literally watched Buzz one time get a microphone and tell the students, I don't care if you come to games or not, but if you do, you need to be here for Alabama State just like you're here for Duke or something like that. And I'm like, good job, Buzz. That's really somebody who's in it for the long haul.
Hashtag get better.
Yeah.
And he and then I think there's a big freshman kickoff in Lane Stadium the opening weekend. He was there as well as some other coaches. So I do think, to answer that question, Coach Young has made some efforts to reach out to
we don't
students.
know about chalk talks or anything like that. So maybe that's something we need to pay attention to and see. All right, what else?
Looks like PJ Hall's committing at 3. He's got a funeral at 4. So there you go.
Yeah, something bad happened with one of his high school classmates or something like that. So
dang. All right, Leo Monroe. With the assistant coaches he's hired and the recruits they could possibly get, do you think Young will have as much success as Bud did in the 3 seasons Bud had been here?
Buzz.
Did I say Bud?
You said Bud.
What? Well, we're talking about Buzz.
He's unlikely to have as much success as Bud. That's like 30 years of.
If he does, it'll be a little different. I mean, Buzz brought in a lot of pure talent. There's 2 NBA players right now, Justin Robinson and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Ahmed Hill is kind of a lower-level fringe NBA guy. He was on a preseason roster. Chris Clark there's talks he could be a second-round pick, maybe a late second-round pick next year.
KJ.
Blackshear, the SEC preseason player of the year. Tech was loaded.
That's a ton of talent.
Absolutely loaded with talent. I don't know that you're going to have a bunch of NBA guys here under Mike Young. Now, he's started off recruiting well. You can't deny that. But I don't know that long-term you're going to be saying, oh, yeah, Nickeil was just the first in a long wave of Virginia Tech draft prospects. If he succeeds, it'll be in a different way, I think. And honestly, it's unfair. That was the first time Virginia Tech made the Sweet 16 since the 1960s, when it was a 24-team field, 32-team field.
Well, maybe I've looked this up. I think it was a 29-team field.
And it's the first time we've ever made the NCAA tournament 3 years in a row.
Right.
So what you're basically asking me is if he will exceed the accomplishments of the best basketball coach in Virginia Tech history. That's unlikely.
What's unlikely is for you to sit there and go, sure.
Right. Yeah. I'm not saying it can't happen or it won't happen. I think he's a really good coach, but it's like expecting – it's the same thing as saying, oh, yeah, Justin Fuente is going to win 300 games and be a Hall of Famer. If you expect that from each and every one of your coaches to be the best that you've ever had.
Yeah. So and I don't know enough about basketball to really speak with any authority on this topic, but one of the things that's made Tony Bennett succeed at UVA is that I read this once when he was hired and when they first started being successful. Somebody said something like, UVA got smart, and finally, we need to put a blooper reel together.
Edit that one.
got smart and finally stopped trying to beat Duke and UNC at their own game, which is to recruit at as high a level as possible and play what you might call conventional basketball. They finally said, let's hire a system guy, and that guy can recruit really well to that university. Mm-hmm. I think that's the sort of thing you want to look for here. Buzz was able to just get a lot of talent on his team. And so as much talent as Buzz had, they were bumping their head against Virginia Tech's ceiling as a program, which they finished 5th in the ACC last year. They were picked to finish 5th. That's where they finished. That's about as good as you can expect for Virginia Tech.
You're not going to consistently have a backcourt that features players the caliber of Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Justin Robinson and Ahmed Hill at the same time.
Now, Seth nearly won the ACC one year. If they'd just beaten Clemson at home in their last regular season game, they would have been the number 1 seed in the ACC tournament. And that's really remarkable. Of course, it was a different league back then. It didn't have Louisville in it, and
Syracuse.
Didn't have Syracuse, didn't have Notre Dame.
Pittsburgh even.
Yeah, so there's just a lot more teams in this league than there were back then. So again, not knowing enough about Mike's system and how it fits in college basketball, but I think that's if you're Virginia Tech and you want to be successful, you kind of have to look at the UVA model. What can we do that's a little different, and how can we recruit guys to it and get guys into this university that want to be here?
Guys, we are exactly at 1 hour on our Virginia Tech men's basketball preview podcast. Malcolm, anything else? Last one, maybe? I think we're at a good place.
Yeah, one more from Tom Lester. Do you think the ACC network will be a better venue for men's basketball and women's basketball than it was for football?
I don't know. I don't get the ACC network. I've never watched it. Couldn't tell you.
I don't have a problem with football. You know, it's given us a chance to watch some Friday night games that weren't necessarily on ESPN, but and having not sat down and analyzed the schedule, I think Tech's actually on the ACC network a lot, like 6 or 8 times. You know, because they're not expected to be a good team. So
well, no, the main reason is from what I've been told.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Comcast is the last holdout, right? So they're putting Virginia and Virginia Tech on the ACC network a lot in football, and I assume they're going to do it the same for men's basketball to get Tech and UVA fans to keep complaining to Comcast.
It's all calculated,
right?
Yeah, and we talked about that before football season even started. That if I remember correctly, their first game was Georgia Tech and Clemson, and South Carolina and Georgia are two big, I think, Comcast states. But yeah, there's a strategy to it,
right? And if you call Comcast, don't just call them and say, "Oh, I'm going to cancel if you don't get the ACC network," and then when they don't get it, you just keep paying Comcast for cable. Actually go through with it.
Yeah.
Unless people actually go through with it, it's not going to change anything.
I just counted 9 games on the ACC network, and then, of course, the non-conference are all on the ACC network extra. So
we'll see how good the broadcast crews are. The broadcasting this year has been really hit or miss. The two that really stand out to me for football are just, you know, everybody's ragging on Mark Jones and what's his name for low fiving when Miami hit the Hail Mary. That was one of just many things that were wrong with that broadcast. That broadcast was horrible.
And that was ESPN.
That was ESPN 3:30 in the afternoon, and the identifying of players, showing reruns. Several times they showed replays of a player who wasn't even involved in the play. You know, so that was just a horrible broadcast all the way around. You compare that to the RSN broadcast of Tech's game against UNC,
Fox Sports South.
Yeah, it like as I said on the podcast the other day, it wasn't ESPN in its prime quality, but it was pretty good. So we'll just see how the broadcast teams do. But I think that's great that they're on the ACC network that much. It's great for me because I get it.
Hokies open up their season Tuesday, November 5th. At Clemson. It'll be aired on ESPNU, and it'll be here before we know it. Great podcast to everyone. Thanks so much for asking questions, all that chimed in. CC, I know I asked you Monday. I'll ask you again. What's coming up this rest of the week on TSL?
We'll probably continue with our basketball previews. I think I'll probably run one more this week and maybe one next week. Friday Q&A as usual. Normal week of content except for added basketball.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Next Monday, the podcast will be you, Evan, are not going to be here, right?
I will not be here on Monday, correct.
So we're going to have Jake Lyman sit in, and Jake has been writing some soccer articles for us. He's done a wrestling article. He does Tech Talk Live notes for us, does a fantastic job with that. We're going to get Jake behind the mic and let him run a podcast. And our guest is going to be a very special guest. Tony Roby has agreed to come on. I texted Tony, said, "Can you be on the podcast next Monday at 9:30 a.m.?" He said yes. That's the extent of our discussions to this point, but he should be on next week. And so we're going to go into depth with Tony about his lineup, who's going to be wrestling at what weights. We're going to talk to him about the schedule, and we're going to talk to him as much as he can about recruiting. Recruiting for Virginia Tech wrestling has been very exciting. The class that he can talk about was the number 5 class in the country that he signed last year. The commitments he has so far, they're something like the 3rd ranked recruiting class in the country. And I was texting a buddy of mine last night, and he said, "Can you imagine if basketball had the 5th best and 3rd best recruiting classes in the country in back-to-back years?" So we'll get Tony to talk about that as much as we can.
He's the best. Coach Roby, always open, and it really was awesome last year when Mackay won the national championship on Saturday, and then they were in with us on the podcast on Monday or Tuesday. I mean, they're willing to come on and talk to us right after he won. So, and I'll close with that. Mackay honored Mackay Lewis, Coach Roby, with Whit Babcock during the Notre Dame game, North Carolina, and standing ovation from Lane Stadium. they really understood the significance of that national championship.
Certainly a major event for Virginia Tech. Yeah.
And just that run he made where he was the 8th seed and he knocked off 4, 2, and 1 or whatever.
And what is considered maybe one of the most difficult weight classes to do it in, 165. How many talented wrestlers there are?
There aren't a lot of small guys and there aren't a lot of huge guys, but there's a ton of guys at that weight class. So, and we'll get into all that with Tony. I think they're going to be able to move David McFadden back down to the 165 class. So we'll talk about all that stuff. So if you are a Virginia Tech wrestling fan, be here at 9:30 Monday for that.
Awesome. Looking forward to Jake coming on as well. That's going to do it for us this week here on the Tech Sideline Podcast. Great one on Monday, in which we broke down the 6 overtime win, and then today breaking down the Virginia Tech men's basketball season. Guys, as always, thanks so much for your time. Looking forward to next week.
Thank you.
All right, for our producer behind the scenes, Malcolm Stewart, on the podcast set, our managing editor, Chris Coleman, our founder and head honcho, Will Stewart. My name is Evan Hughes, podcast host, saying so long. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week right here on the Tech Sideline Podcast, presented by the Fisher Law Firm.